Hey there. If you are a viewer of this channel, it should be no surprise to you that I am a big fan and friend of Empress effects. And this goes back to when I first bought the Empress reverb and was just blown away by the quality of the algorithms. And since then, I've reviewed a whole lot of reverb pedals, and Empress has remained on top, and it's like my personal scale of rating reverb pedals is now between 1 and Empress. Then you have the Empress ecosystem, which has this extremely diverse selection of powerful delay algorithms times 2. Like you can run 2 different engines of the pedal at once, so you could turn like one guitar note into an entire soundscape. Then you have the Zoya, which is almost exhaustively powerful. I've written so much generative music for it that the pedal literally opened for me at a show in Los Angeles in the beginning of this year. So it goes without saying that Empress is really good at designing and engineering digital effects pedals. Like top shelf, they are the company to try to match. There ain't nothing digital about these here compression pedals. They have 100% analog circuitry, but first, we need to talk about why you need compression on your instruments in the first place. Somebody with little to no audio engineering knowledge would plug a guitar into a compression pedal, twist some knobs around and say, huh, it's a sound better pedal. And it is, but so's an analog EQ. The core functionality of a compressor is simply to compress quiet and loud things. I did a lot of A and B tests, and this one is a prime example. It is an acoustic guitar with quiet finger picking, and then it goes into heavy strumming. Now, unless you're getting experimental or using compression artistically, which you can and should, more on that later, you typically want compression to be subtle or almost unnoticeable to your listeners, and the ratio switch would probably be the first place to try and dial in that sweet spot. And every instrument has different transients, so there is no universal setting. Contrary to popular belief, compressors do not make quiet things louder. They only make loud things quieter. So the higher the ratio, the lower the peak output signal. But fortunately, we have an input and output volume knob to make up for this, which means that the quiet sound sounds louder, but that's just because the overall volume of the pedal has been turned up. Even more fortunately, with this type of parallel compression, we have a mix knob that allows us to blend the compressed signal with the original signal. So we could have really strong compression blended in at 20%, or you could have really light compression blended in at 90%. For example, a ton of compression very, very subtly mixed actually sounds like a signal exciter, but maybe that signal exciter has a little bit too much mid-range and not enough high end, and fortunately on both of these pedals we have tone control done. So what is attack and release? Just about every person who owns a synthesizer or synthesizer plugin knows what attack and release is, but I would advise not using that as a reference for a compressor because it's different. A long attack on a compressor means that the volume reduction is not going to kick in for a specified delay after the threshold is hit, meaning less compression. So a long attack will actually sound much crisper and less noticeable, and a shorter attack should be reserved for things that aren't as dynamic, like a kick drum or a distorted guitar. Now, release is when that compressor's threshold resets, and you would want it shorter for something like a kick drum or something very active like a slap bass, and you would want it longer for something like a violin. Another thing to keep in mind is placement in your signal chain. For example, a lot of guitarists have their compressor as the first thing they plug their guitar into on their pedal board. If you have something like an octave pedal or an amp sim, you might want to consider putting that before your compressor, but there really are no rules here. Compressors really shine when you use them in creative and interesting ways. For example, I like putting overdrive behind my compressor and then putting another overdrive in front of my compressor. That just gives me a lot of control to find new colors of distortion. So side chaining. If you've heard music like this, then you are familiar with the classic creative overusage of it. And what you're actually hearing is a kick drum signaling the compression of the synthesizer pad. This technique is obviously very popular in dance music, and it's also called ducking. And ducking is actually a simplified way of accomplishing that same thing, and I would almost recommend somebody research the difference between the two, because compression can sometimes just be overly complicated to get that effect. You can use the Empress compressors this way if you like. It actually has a send and return on the back. However, the MKIIs have a unique analog circuit design that is different than any other compressor pedal that I know of. And let's get into that. So put on your engineer pants, we're going to the advanced level. Okay, so let's listen to a song that I quickly mixed with a bunch of audio stems, A and B. What if I told you that the only difference between A and B were these two pedals? This one on the upright bass, this one on the guitar. The magic of how this works, for example, would be the kick drum and the upright bass sharing a little bit of the same frequencies. And when both of those frequencies are hit at the same time, the overall amplitude of the song rises. If you look at the waveform, you'll notice that you occasionally have these little spikes where this is happening. And that means that you can't turn the song up loud without it clipping or distorting. If you cleverly use side chaining in a compressor to limit this frequency overlap, it's almost indistinguishable to the listener. They just hear a louder song that just sounds more powerful, and your tracks essentially master themselves. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting or recommending that you should be mastering your recorded material through compressor pedals, but the big advantage here is that your band can sound mastered in real time when engineered this way, and it even allows you to use that instant feedback to play your instrument more dynamically and with more freedom. This is a major reason why a bigger band that has a crew full of audio engineers sounds so much more powerful and fuller than a smaller band does when you see them perform live. And I'm actually going to show you the signal path of how this all works, and I'm going to show you how you can use a pedal like this to get the exact same effect that these bigger bands are getting out of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars worth of rack compressors. The Empress MKII compressors use feedback compression, which is something that is typically only found in more expensive rack units. So let's look at the signal path inside the pedal to see how this works. So the amplifier that reduces the volume actually goes into the sidechain insert internally, and then back into the level detector. So if you're not using the sidechain input at all, it behaves like a normal compressor. But the sidechain has both an input and output when you use a simple ring tip adapter. This opens up the possibility of modifying the internal signal within the sidechain process. A practical use for this would be running the sidechain send to a mixer with a kick drum, isolating the exact frequency that interferes, then pipe it back to the pedal for literally the most accurate sidechain compression possible, something that would have previously set you back this much. I'm not about to even dip a toe into the what compressor sounds best pool, because it is just as subjective as what microphone sounds best. Despite having a bunch of modular synths and stuff, I'm not what you would consider an analog purist, but I do believe that analog compressors will always be better than digital compressors simply because of how that threshold is detected. With digital compressors, that threshold detection will always be limited to a bitrate, or ones and zeros, at least until we have quantum compressors, whereas analog does not have such limitations. I'm going to step over that rabbit hole and just tell you that in my opinion, there are 3 compressor pedals that sound rack compressor quality, and that would be the MKII 76 stacked version and these two. And I think the reason for that is because all of the above use feedback or parallel compression. In fact, I've seen a bit of debate online comparing the original Empress compressor to the MKII 76, and I'll just agree that they're both top shelf compressors. But this sidechain send and return is an absolute game changer. And to my knowledge, there is no other way to get this type of precise control out of a pedal. You have to get a rack unit or a module for that. Finally, the price. At the time of me saying this, you can pre-order these pedals for $250 each. And I'll be totally honest, when I was initially talking to the engineer and playing with the prototype, I thought that they were going to retail for about $449 or $499. So I'm really surprised by how affordable they are. So other than the name, what is the difference between the two? Well, it's not the color, because you could get each pedal in either color, which is cool, but also potentially confusing. Mitch Lance over at Empress actually wrote a very informative blog post pointing out and explaining the differences between the two pedals. The biggest and most obvious of these differences is that the MKII has a tone knob and a sidechain high-pass filter switch. The bass compressor has a high-pass filter knob and a tone switch. Obviously, if bass is your primary instrument, or if you plan on using this on a bassy synthesizer, for example, then the bass compressor would be your choice. If you're a guitarist, or if you don't have an EQ in your setup and you want more tone control over the output signal, then the MKII is probably going to suit you best. I personally think that unless you intend on using these sidechain sends and returns a whole lot, you'd probably be happy with either one. But if you're having trouble deciding between the two, definitely check out the blog post. I've linked it below. So with that, I hope that you learned something about compression today. And I hope that it makes your music sound even better than it already does, which I didn't even think was possible because you are super cool. I'm gonna go play with the compressor now. How do you think this compressor sounds? And if you think it's the best dang compressor pedal you've ever heard, what was your favorite pedal before this? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video or if you learned anything, subscribe to my channel. If you like music and you want to support me or this channel, then be sure to check out my Bandcamp link, etc. down below. And if you want to see what I'm up to on a more frequent basis, then follow me on Instagram or Twitter. And with that, I bid you farewell. Bye.